Hello, and welcome to HHH, the podcast where we talk about those horrible humans in history. I am your host, Angela Pearson, and welcome to today's episode. Be sure you are liking, subscribing, and if you know anyone who likes these creepy stories about horrible people and murder and that kind of thing, be sure to tell them about this podcast and share it with all your friends and family. Because there's nothing like saying I love you, like sharing a creepy story, right? Anyways, welcome today. I am excited to talk about this individual because everybody knows this name, but I don't think everybody knows his story. So this individual, based off of some of the research I found, was literally able to change the climate and cool the earth because he killed so much of the population, like 25% of the world's population at the time. So forests were literally able to grow back because there were no more people there. So this person killed a lot of people. And his life is actually pretty controversial. Some see him as a tyrant and a genocidal maniac. Others see him as a really great hero that was really forward thinking. And that's actually kind of how history works. The hero is very subjective depending on who's telling the story, right? So that's kind of the tale of this individual. And this person actually has records in Persian records, Russian records, Chinese records, and they all talk about Genghis Khan. That's who we're talking about today. Genghis Khan, but not all of them have the same dates. Names and all of that, not all of them actually match up, so they're not all the same. So a lot of this history comes from one specific source, and this source wasn't created until a few years after Genghis Khan. So take all the stories with a grain of salt. Most of it's probably pretty accurate, but you know how it goes when people tell stories, they kind of embellish them a little bit. But today we are going to be talking about Genghis Khan and the horrible things that he did, including murdering like 40 million people. So tune in, listen up. I'm excited. So let's get into this, guys. Genghis Khan. So Genghis Khan was born in 1155. So this is probably the furthest back we've gone so far in our podcast. So, well, I say 1150 or 1155. It could actually be 1162 or 1167. It's a little hard to say because, like I said, they didn't have a lot of written records back then, so a lot of the times, dates, everything don't match up exactly, but most people believe that he actually was born in 1162. That's the running theory right now, is 1162. And he was actually originally named Temujin. And I don't know what it is with all of our subjects. They really love changing their name, but he wasn't the one who changed his name. And we'll explore that later. For now, when I'm talking about Temujin, just know I'm talking about Genghis Khan. That's just his original name is Temujin. And I like it better. So we're going to use that for most of this episode. So Temujin was born somewhere on the Mongolian steppes. And if you're not familiar with geography, so Mongolia is just above China. And that's kind of the area that I'm talking about. It wasn't actually Mongolia because Genghis Khan made it into Mongolia, basically. But that's the kind of area. It was a harsh wilderness. So the life that he lived, the life that he was born into, was incredibly harsh. Not really an amazing place to grow up. It got really cold. The weather was very volatile, windy all the time, that kind of stuff. There were a lot of different tribes in this area, and he was part of one of the factions of Mongols. So even within the Mongols, there were different tribes that would fight with each other and have beefs with each other, and even families had issues with each other, and life was super uncertain because the environment was horrible, and if the environment didn't kill you, then the other tribes might kill you. So it was a really rough place to grow up because you never know if you were going to survive or not. So basically, the hardiest and strongest survived of these people. Now, they say that when he was born holding a blood clot in his hand. I know that sounds super gross, but they believed that this was a sign or an omen that he was actually going to be a great warlord. And like I said, these histories were written after the fact, so I don't know if they made this up after, but apparently it was predicted he was going to be a great warlord because of that blood clot in his hand when he was born. Now, Genghis Khan's father actually had 2 wives, and he could have technically had more because that was kind of the culture for that area. Now, Genghis Khan's mother, or Temujin's mother, was named Herlin, and I have to tell you, this is the most romantic story that I have read thus far of our subjects' parents. Their love story, guys, you will not be able to believe it. It's just so romantic. So what happened was Genghis Khan's father kidnapped his mother from a previous husband in a different tribe. Isn't that the sweetest story you ever heard? He just snatched her away, just stole her heart, literally, from her other husband. But that was common in these tribes. That was the norm. That's how you actually dated and courted people, was you just stole the woman and made her your own bride. So that is what happened with his mother. And he actually had 3 brothers, a sister, and 2 half-brothers from his dad's second wife. Now, most of the time when he was a young boy was spent riding around on horses, roaming the plains, and hunting. They were nomadic tribes that would move from place to place, living in tents, while their flocks would graze. And once the grazing area would run out, they'd get up, pack up, and move somewhere else. So he was known as a pretty defiant child. He was pretty brave. And the only thing he supposedly feared was dogs because he didn't like the way that they barked. But he was also known as a big loner. He kind of spent a lot of time alone, just thinking. He was really independent and would make his own decisions without consulting other people. So that's kind of what he was known for as a young child. At the ripe old age of 8 or 9, his parents arranged a marriage for him to Borta, a woman from a different tribe. And his father, so they were betrothed. They weren't actually married yet. They were just betrothed. And part of the custom was to drop off your child at their future spouse's tribe so they could get to know their future spouse. They could get to know the customs of the tribe. So his father brought him to Borta's tribe, dropped him off so he could grow up with his betrothed. Well, his father, on his way home from dropping Temujin off, his father actually ran into some tartar tribe members who were out hunting, and they actually offered him food, came and sat down, he ate with them, drank with them, and it turns out they had poisoned it. So 3 days later, he barely made it to their camp and collapsed in the arms of his wife, of Temujin's mother. And they sent for him, But by the time Temujin was able to make it back, it was too late. His father had already passed away, and he was now supposed to be the one to inherit the power. Now, to add insult to injury, after the death of her husband, Honole's whole tribe just abandoned her, just walked away, leaving her the sole defender of her family. So she was alone with all of the children, including her 2 stepchildren, because their mother also abandoned them after her husband was killed. So she must have been a pretty strong woman, and that was definitely passed on to her son, Temujin. So being the firstborn of the first wife, Temujin believed that it was his birthright to rule the family, to be in charge of the family. But his half-brother, I'm going to butcher his name, I think it's Better, Behter, and we're just going to call him Better, who was about 2 years older than him, he thought that he could claim to be the chief of their family. And what actually happened is a fight broke out between the two of them about how the food should be divided between the family. And Temujin hatched up a plan with his younger brother to actually kill Better when he was alone. And they actually did it. Temujin pulled out an arrow, shot his brother in the back, and just murdered him. Flat out murdered him. And don't worry, all of his siblings accepted him as the leader of the family after this point. But it showed that even at a young age, like, you did not mess with Temujin. He was ruthless from the beginning. Like, he was no nonsense. So he became the leader of his family. And like I said, he learned a lot of his strength from his mother. There's a legend that says she actually sat all the children down and was talking to them about strength of being together. And she took out an arrow and broke it in half and showed her children how weak it was. And then she took out a bundle of arrows and then said, okay, now try and break it. And basically taught them that if you hold together as a group, you're much stronger. So hold to each other, which I thought was a pretty cool story. Now, in 1181, Temujin was 15 years old. He was actually gaining a lot of popularity amongst the tribes, and he was proving to be a very strong leader and was able to take care of his family. And the tribe that had abandoned them began to worry about his popularity and began to worry that he would become a threat and try and, take over the tribe again, because he technically should have been the one who inherited the leadership of that tribe. So instead of waiting around to see what would happen, they decided to act upon that threat, and they invaded his family's encampment to capture him. But he actually got away from that invasion. But 9 days later, they found him exhausted and hungry and took him into custody. They brought him back to their encampment and placed a heavy wooden yoke around his neck. Like, it was just literally like a plank of wood around his neck, and placed one guard on him. They thought that plank around his neck would keep him where he was. But Temujin was very smart, and unfortunately for them, he actually overpowered the young man who was placed in charge of guarding him. And he would roll out of the tent, like just under the little flappy flap, just rolled out of that to escape and made it all the way to a nearby river. But he realized he wouldn't be able to get very far with that wooden plank around his neck. And of course, they noticed he was missing immediately, so they all started searching for him. Well, while he was being searched for, he actually snuck back into the tent and told the kid to let him get away. Like, look, you gotta help me get this thing off my neck, or else I'm gonna tell everybody that you helped me escape. I'm gonna tell everybody it was all your fault. And if you don't help me, you're going to be in so much trouble. So you're going to take this thing off my neck. Oh, and you're going to go get me a horse. And guess what? That's actually what happened. The guy that had been guarding him helped him out of the plank of wood around his neck and got him a horse, and he was able to ride away free as a bird. Now, in 1182, now that he was the ripe old age of 16, he decided it was time to settle down and get married. He was old enough. It was time. So he went back to claim his bride. And as a wedding gift, her father actually gave him a really nice sable coat. I know what you're thinking. What the heck is a sable coat? Well, I will tell you. So this coat was actually made out of really heavy fur. It was a really heavy fur coat, and it was like the most prized fur that you could get on the Mongolian steppe. Like, it was really warm. So it was a pretty fancy gift that he got from his new father-in-law. Well, after they were married, he picked up his wife and dropped her off at his mother's house and then rode to a different village. So he rode to Togrul, who was the chief of, well, he was the Khan of the Kadites. Now, Khan is basically the chief. So he actually rode immediately to visit this chief Togrul to present him with this coat. Now, in Mongol society, the coat was a symbol of an alliance. So he was thinking ahead and realizing that he was going to need some allies now that he was gaining some strength and some popularity, especially after being captured with a wood plank around his neck. So Togrul and Temujin became fast friends and became allies. Well, not long after forming this alliance, Temujin's camp was attacked by the Merkit tribe, which, I know this is going to get really complicated real fast. This was the tribe that his father actually kidnapped his mother from. So they had not forgotten. It had been a long while, but don't worry, they had not forgotten what Temujin's father had done. And so they came back for revenge, and they were looking to steal all of their wives. And they ended up taking Temujin's wife and married her off to one of their own. Like, basically like, well, you stole my wife, so I'm going to steal your wife, so ha ha ha. So when that happened, Temujin called on his new buddy, Togrul, and said, dude, I need your help. They took my wife. Help me. So Togrul agreed to lead an army of 20,000 men to go save Temujin's wife. 20,000 men to do this. Oh, and it gets better. So they also convinced a man named Jamuka, we're going to talk about him in a second, the leader of the Jadarin tribe, to join with 20,000 of his men. So they've got 40,000 men that are going to go rescue Temujin's wife. Now, we're going to pause on that story really quick and take a random side route because I want to talk to you a little bit about Jamuka. He is important. So Jamuka and Temujin were BFFs. And when I mean BFFs, I mean, you know the term bromance? Take that to like the next level. These guys were like, oh, they were super, super tight. So tight that they would even sleep in the same bed, making Temujin's wife very jealous. They were a tight group. And Temujin and Jamuka's relationship is a really important one that we will get back to. But I really want to emphasize that bromance does not even begin to describe their relationship. It goes beyond that. So just know that this will come back. So back to Temujin's wife being stolen. So with these 40,000 men, they went to that tribe and annihilated them. Just utterly obliterated them. And they saved his wife, who was now pregnant. Now, they don't know if it was because she had been raped multiple times when she was in the possession of this other tribe, or if it was actually Temujin's son. They didn't know. They didn't have paternity tests back then. So, what did Temujin do about this? Well, he actually raised the boy as his own. He raised the child as his own child, which I think is pretty admirable. Like, I think that's pretty awesome because this was going to be the heir to his kingdom, basically. And he didn't know whose it was, so he just assumed it was going to be his. So I thought that was pretty awesome. So there's a couple things he does that are pretty cool, but don't worry. We're getting to the horrible human part here in a second. So a year after his wife's rescue, Jamuka, his bro-friend, I'm going to start that as a trend, his bro-friend, his BFF, whatever you want to call it, and Temujin actually had a falling out with each other. They had a fight over something really dumb, like supplies or land or something. Every account said something slightly different as to what triggered this, but it was a big enough fight that they decided that they were now mortal enemies. They wanted nothing to do with each other. So in 1187, their falling out actually triggered a battle that was actually named. It was called the Battle of Dalan Bajut. When Jamuka and Temujin's forces met, they fought each other and fought each other hard. Well, Temujin got defeated. He lost so badly that it seemed like he was going to be wiped off of the face of history. Like no one would hear from him ever again. He would never exist. That's how soundly he was beaten. Like his forces were just destroyed. And interesting thought, if he had actually died in this battle, if he genuinely had been wiped off of the face of the earth, it would have changed the world's history. Not just part of the world's history, the entire world's history, because of the death of one person. That is crazy and mind-blowing. Like, the entire world history, everything we know now would be different if he had died. But he didn't. So, for the next 8 years, he actually disappears. No one knows what happened. Some people think he was a slave in China. Others think he was just biding his time in a remote place in Mongolia and like slowly building up his troops again. But in 1195, he came back to Mongolian steppes and was ready to take his revenge. He had somehow gathered a new army and was ready to defeat all of his enemies with the help of Togrul. Togrul was still a loyal ally to Temujin at this point. So now that he had returned, this triumphant return, he was more brutal than ever. I mean, he was brutal as a kid, murdering his own brother, but now he was ruthless. He didn't just want to defeat his enemies, he wanted to destroy them. And I just picture like an evil, like, destroy my enemies. That is what he was ready to do. So when all the warriors of a rival tribe, when they started fighting all their rival tribes, when they killed off all the warriors in that tribe, what Temujin would do is he would take all of their women and order all of the men to be killed, except for the very youngest children. You had to be a very young child. Otherwise, you got wiped out. And by killing all but the very youngest children, the reason why he did that is because he didn't want anyone coming back to seek revenge against him, like he was doing, right? So he was just cutting that off right at the source by killing everyone, except for the women that obviously they kidnapped and did other things too, and all the really small children. And it also sent a message to all the other tribes that if you stand against Temujin, you will lose. And not only will you lose, no, you will be wiped off of the face of the planet, and your family will be wiped off of the face of this planet. So think that through. And because of this, it actually inspired quite a few tribes to join his cause and not fight against them because they wanted to live. Strangely enough, they wanted to survive. So these conquerings of all these different tribes actually started to create some social change because there was a new class system established, and it wasn't based off of like who you knew. It was based off of your ability rather than your connections, right? So Temujin promoted people that were skilled. And I want to mention someone specifically. I know I'm bringing in a lot of random people, but they're important. So I want to mention a man named Subutai, I think is how you say his name. You guys know, not good at names. But Subutai is an important person in Temujin's life. He was born the son of a blacksmith, and in normal Mongolian tribes and society, he would have been stuck as a blacksmith for the rest of his life. There was no movement available. You were born into a blacksmith family, you became a blacksmith, your children became blacksmiths. That's just how it worked. But under Temujin's leadership, he actually rose to be the chief military strategist. Now, he is still known to this day as one of the greatest generals to have ever lived, and he has conquered more territory than any other human in history. So because of this forward-thinking class system that Temujin established, he was able to create the best general the world has ever seen. So that was pretty impressive because that was unheard of at the time. Now, Temujin also divided all of the spoils of war amongst all of his men equally. Everyone got the same pay, including him. Everyone was equal. Everyone got the same pay. That was not the norm, and it wasn't the norm for a very long time. I don't even know if it's still the norm, but it was not the norm for a very long time. So this was very forward-thinking as well. While this created a lot of strong loyalty in the lower ranking of the men, it caused a little bit of ire with the current nobility in the Mongols. They did not like this change because they felt like they were being shortchanged because they should have been getting paid more. And that included Togrul, his first ally. He became super upset that this is what was happening. And he actually turned on Temujin and started fighting with him. But he was swiftly defeated. And by defeated, I mean just annihilated by Temujin and his forces. So once Togrul was defeated, that left 13 tribes of Mongols that were not conquered by Temujin. Everyone else was underneath his power. But can you guess, just a random guess, just throw it out there, who do you think controlled these remaining 13 tribes? That's right, Jamuka, his old BFF, his bro friend, and now rival, Jamuka, had the power over the remaining 13 tribes. So after the Battle of Dalan Bajut, when Jamuka had won, he had actually celebrated by boiling 70 of Temujin's soldiers alive. Now this is important because Jamuka's men remembered this. You know, you don't just witness 70 people being boiled alive and forget about that anytime soon, right? So when they finally met back up to fight, because Temujin wanted control over all the tribes, in 1195, when they faced each other again, many of Jamuka's most important generals actually defected and turned and fought against him to fight for Temujin. Because, I don't know, I guess boiling soldiers alive in front of your men was a bad choice. So Temujin and his troops would end up winning the battle against Jamuka's troops. And instead of letting Jamuka live, he just sliced off his head. So that was the end of the bromance and the bro friends. So in 1206, all the Mongol tribes were now united under Temujin. He had all the power. And this is actually when he gained his name, Genghis Khan. That's the name that echoes throughout all of history, Genghis Khan. And a lot of historians think that the name means universal ruler, but there's actually no proof that that's for sure what it meant because there was no written documentation at the time. So it could have actually just been a name that Genghis Khan thought sounded sweet and decided, yeah, that's what I want to be known for throughout history. Genghis Khan, that sounds amazing. And some people pronounce it Chinggis Khan instead of Genghis Khan. And that's only because translating things to English was a little tricky. So if you think I'm saying it wrong by saying it Genghis Khan, come at me, bro, because you can't prove it. So, ha! Anyways, a lot of people believe that Genghis Khan had hordes and hordes of men that just plowed through every single enemy that they had. But the truth is, Genghis Khan was actually more often than not outnumbered in his battles. The only reason why he did so well was because he had the better trained men, they were better led, and they were so loyal to him because of the way he treated them with respect. So they were also better logistically. They were hunters and gatherers. So for them, their supply line was wherever they were. They could hunt, they could fish, they could gather roots, whatever they needed to. So no matter where they went, they had a supply line where most of the time, if you think about big events in history, like in World War II or anything, a lot of the issues when the Germans were defeated in Russia were because of supply lines. They were able to push, but their supplies weren't catching up. So that's a common theme in history where supply lines can't keep up with the speed of the army, but that was not a problem for Genghis Khan. His army could just hunt and get the food that they needed. Now, all of the Mongols had been conquered at this time, so Genghis Khan was interested in spreading the wealth, or his wealth, I guess I should say. So he decided to actually attack a Chinese province in western Zai. And this province was actually a really important part of the Silk Road. If you don't know much about the Silk Road, this was a vital trading route where most of the wealth and spices came from across Asia and to Europe. It was a big trading route. So Western Zai was right in the middle of that and super important. Well, he wanted it. So he decided that they were going to go and conquer that. But his men were outnumbered 2-1. But not only that, they had to cross the entire Gobi Desert to reach this province. They had to cross one of the largest deserts in the world. And he was able to do that because these men were so resilient, because where they came from, they had to be resilient. They would drink the milk from their horses as they were crossing the desert to stay alive. And then when they got even more desperate for food, and thought they were about to die, they would actually open a vein on their horses and drink their horse's blood to survive. And that is how they made it across the desert. And once they made it across the desert, they discovered something that they were not technically used to in war. And that was walls. They were not used to actual walls. Everyone that they'd been fighting up until this point lived in tent cities, basically. They all lived in tents. Tents are really easy to just plow through and burn down, but walls are a different story. They didn't know what to do because they got to the city Zhongxing. I'm going to say all of these really wrong. And they didn't know what to do. So they noticed there was a river next to this city, and they decided what they would do is they would reroute the river, send it into the city, it would flood the city, everybody would drown, and they would conquer the city. So that's what they did. They went ahead and diverted the river and flooded the city, but that didn't actually work. What happened is they diverted the river. I think a little bit of it got into the city, but it mostly ended up flooding their own camp instead. Whap, whap. So it didn't really work. So instead of doing that, what they decided to do, they moved on from the walls, they moved on from the city, and decided to just start destroying everything else. They went and found all the small towns, all the small villages, and just wiped them out, burned them to the ground. So they fought everywhere else around Western Zai that they could get their hands on, and eventually they surrendered to Genghis Khan and his men because they had just annihilated everything else except for the city. So they surrendered and became the very first vassal state of the new empire that was forming in the world. So next, Genghis Khan wanted to take on the Jin dynasty in China. Now, remember, it's rumored that he was a slave in China, and they believe it was in the Jin dynasty that he was a slave. And so he took 75,000 men and invaded on horseback, murdering everything that they came across, despite being outnumbered 8-1 against the Jin fighters. 8-1. And again, they had to figure out these walls. Walls became their biggest barrier. And for this specific dynasty, the Jins, they had the Great Wall of China. Now, I do want to clarify, this wasn't actually the Great Wall of China that we know today. It was more of the okay-ish Wall of China at that time. It wasn't the Great Wall. It was okay-ish. So they were able to get past that one pretty easily. But any walls around any cities presented such a barrier to them. So again, they just decided to attack everything outside of the city. And this kept the Jin warriors on their toes because they were fighting for all these smaller territories and trying to regain them back. And the capital of the Jin dynasty was called Zhongdu, which is currently Beijing. So if you know where Beijing is, that's where Zhongdu was. And his men just could not get in there. And so he went across the nation, killing tens of thousands of peasants, and even took tens of thousands of them to be used as human shields against their own soldiers, against the Jin soldiers. So tens of thousands of people died, and then tens of thousands of people got to be human shields. How horrible is that? Now, while this was devastating for the people of Jin, it actually forced the Jin army to just be continually moving around and waste all their energy, all their resources on just the small towns and villages. And when Genghis Khan and his men attacked, it was swift and it was fierce. So the Jin felt like they were just fighting smoke. because they just would disappear so quickly. Angry smoke is what they were fighting. And chaos just took over the area. And with all the small areas destroyed and conquered, Genghis knew that he needed to take the cities next. That's what was left. And they were not giving up like the others had done. So these darn walls were just getting in their way. So what he did was he secretly recruited siege engineers from the Jin dynasty to help him build siege weapons to take down their own city. He was really smart. He really loved learning from the people that he was conquering. For example, when he conquered the Uyghurs, that's who taught them how to use written language, was the Uyghurs. And they learned about gunpowder from the Chinese. So they got gunpowder from the Chinese, and not to mention all the weapons and armor upgrades that they got from all the different areas that they conquered. He was smart and learned from everyone that they conquered as he went along. He took the best of all of the cultures that he was conquering and implemented it. And even with all this struggle to conquer the Jin, in 1215, he actually had to flee back to the Mongolian steppes because he could not beat the Jin. Well, this was a real bummer for him, but with the defeat fresh in his mind, he actually decided to go west. Kind of like the American pioneers, Gotta explore this new area, so they're gonna go west. And he decided he would try to take over the Karakita Empire. Now, this empire was run by a Mongol prince who had actually fled when Genghis Khan had defeated his own tribe. So his name was Kuchlug, and he, at one point, decided he wanted to expand his empire too. So he attacked a city called Amalek, that is what it's called for sure. Well, this was not a smart idea on his part because the city happened to be run by Genghis Khan's grandson-in-law and was under the protection of the Mongolian Empire. So murdering a member of Genghis Khan's family was probably not a good choice on this man's part because Genghis Khan was pissed. He was not happy when he found out what happened. He sent 20,000 warriors to save Al-Malik and hunt down Kuchlig. I don't know how to say his name. Anyways, again, all of his troops were super outnumbered, but it didn't matter because they were so well organized and so fast and so swift. He just annihilated them. So many of the territories under Kuchlig, I swear, I don't know how to say these names. I listened to them so many times and I still can't say it. Once these territories decided to join Genghis Khan without ever being defeated because their ruler had been a Buddhist who had persecuted them and forced them to join his faith. Well, Genghis Khan allowed the practice of any and all religions within his empire. So the people thought that it was a much better deal than what they currently had. So they just willingly went over to join the ranks of Genghis Khan and have him be their ruler because they were sick of the religious persecution and being killed because they did not want to become Buddhists, which is ironic. I feel like Buddhists are usually pretty peaceful. Anyways, so this policy, again, was ahead of his time because many, many rulers forced their followers to follow whatever religion they were in. So everyone loved that they could be in whatever religion they wanted to. So they willingly joined the ranks of Genghis Khan. And after conquering Karakahit, oh man, I'm going to butcher all of these names. Sorry, guys. After conquering that territory, Genghis Khan's empire spread like wildfire. It spread from the Pacific to the Middle East, where it would border a new neighbor. This new neighbor was another world power that I am sure you guys have heard of this world power. There's no way you haven't. I'm being very sarcastic. If you could not tell, the name of this world power was Khwarezmian. It was the Khwarezmian Empire. And he decided that Genghis Khan decided after 30 years of fighting, he was ready for a break. He was ready to make peace and have friends. So he decided not to invade this new empire. He decided just to make friends with them. And he sent 450 merchants carrying gold, silk, steel, and other fancy things to try and set up trade between the two nations. So I'm sure you can guess what happened, right? It went really smoothly. Genghis Khan finally found his new BFF, and everything was just honky-dory, right? Well, if you think that's what happened, you haven't listened to enough of my podcast, and you need to listen to more of it, because that is not what happened. If you guess that all the merchants were murdered by the governor of the city Atara when they arrived and he stole all of their goods, you win the daily prize. I don't know what that is, but we can find you something. So yeah, all of the merchants, every single one of them got slaughtered and all of their goods were stolen. And remember how it's not good to make Genghis Khan angry? Well, I'm sure you can guess he was probably a little angry about this. So let's see what happens to that governor, shall we? When Genghis Khan found out about this treacherous action, he was actually fighting the Jin dynasty again, because he never wanted to give up on that. So he was fighting them again. And when he heard, he immediately sent a new convoy to the Shah, the leader of the Khwarezmian, that's how you say it, empire, demanding an explanation. And the Shah had actually never heard of the Mongols. I was super confused when this emissary was arriving, and instead of apologizing and explaining what happened, the Shah did the worst thing he could have possibly done in this situation. He murdered every single one of the diplomatic convoy that Genghis Khan sent. Not only did he murder them, oh no, he took it a step further and mutilated their bodies. Now, I feel as if he should have done a little bit of research before just destroying an emissary coming for peace. Like, maybe do a little research. But again, let's see what happens to the Shah, shall we? So, to say Genghis Khan was pissed would be the understatement of the year. He basically was like, "Oh, hey, Jin, can you hold on a second? Can we pause this fight? Hold on. I just need to bring my whole army over here real quick and just annihilate some people. Can you just hold on?" He literally dropped everything and went to take revenge on that empire. Now, think about Genghis Khan. He was known for brutality. He was known for murdering thousands of people. But all of that was done in the name of expansion. It wasn't because he was seeking revenge or anything. He just wanted to expand his empire. Now, really think about this. He was not in it for the revenge. But he was now coming to seek revenge. And I want you to ponder on that for a second. If he was super brutal without being angry, what is revenge going to look like from Genghis Khan? Well, I will tell you, the military campaign that ensued after this insult would be, to this day, one of the bloodiest campaigns in the entire world. He struck like lightning and flew through the empire like fire in dry grass. Any city, any town, anything that tried to fight back against the Mongol horde was annihilated. Entire populations of cities were slaughtered. everyone. It's estimated that in this invasion, that 15 million people died during this campaign. 15 million. And it only took them 2 years to conquer them. That's it. 2 years, 15 million people. That is insane. And I know you're probably thinking, oh, you forgot about our 2 friends who started this entire disaster. You want to hear what happened to them? Do you? Well, here you go. The governor, the one who killed the merchants, was actually captured by Genghis Khan's men and put to death. And I know what you're thinking. They probably just cut off his head or something. Oh no, they did not. They didn't beat him. They didn't behead him. What they did do was pour molten silver into his eyes and his ears and into his mouth. Yeah, that's right. They poured molten silver into his eyes, ears, and mouth. Yeah, that did the trick right there. So, next, the Shah. You want to hear about the Shah? Well, he went on retreat and fled as fast as he could. And he made it all the way to the Caspian Sea, but he ended up pooping himself to death. And I'm not joking. Yep, pooping himself to death. He ended up getting dysentery and died of dysentery. Like in, what is that game that was played a lot in the 90s? He died of dysentery. So that's what happened to our friends who created this entire mess. So on his way back to China to, start fighting the jinn again, a rebellion actually started rising up in Western Z. So Zai, not Z, Zai. So he was actually heading in that direction to stomp that rebellion out. And at this point, he was getting up there in the years. He was starting to get a little old, and his strength was about to give out. He had been strong and fought so hard, and he finally hit his limit. So we don't actually know how officially he died. There's a lot of debate about it. Some people think that he died after getting ill from an injury he got falling from a horse while on a hunting trip. Because, no modern medicine, if you got injured, it could be a life-threatening thing, no matter how small the injury. So some people think that's how he died, but a lot of people, most people, believe that in 1227, he actually died of the bubonic plague, which is really ironic because it's thought that the Mongols were the ones who brought the bubonic plague to Europe in the 1340s. So it'd be ironic if he died of the bubonic plague and his, predecessors would bring that to Europe. But that's what they believed, is he actually died of the bubonic plague. And for the next 140 years, his children and their children would continue to spread the Mongol Empire until it reached across all of China, into some of India, even into Europe and the Middle East. It covered 9 million square miles and had over 100 million people in it. That was 25% of the world's population at the time. That is insane. So it was huge. So he had a pretty good legacy, and there's a lot of people that think he was a revolutionary leader, and he was inspirational, and that his brutal actions were just a product of his time. And I actually kind of believe that. I think that's pretty true. If you look at how people reacted to things back then, it was a dog-eat-dog world. You killed or be killed. And so I think his brutality was just an echo of the times because they were just brutal times. So I don't necessarily think, if we were looking at his actions in that time period, I don't think we would think he was brutal. But then I look at the fact that he killed over 40 million people. So there's that. So it's kind of hard to overlook that now. So back then, it probably wasn't as brutal, but we look at it now and that is just insane. 40 million people. And he inspired and encouraged trade. He believed in freedom of religion. He revolutionized warfare and promoted new ideas and supported the ability to move within ranks, not based off of your birthright, but based off of your skill. So he was very forward thinking and brought a lot of new ideas to the world. So I think he does deserve some credit for that. But 40 million people, man, the world would be a literal different place if all of those people had not been killed. It's just crazy to think what could have happened if that many people had not been wiped off of the face of the planet. Now, while people do believe that he was a great leader and he was forward-thinking both socially, military, he did reduce the entire world's population by 11%. So, like the entire world's population by 11%? Minimum. Not to mention the raping and kidnapping of all the women and children, and which I didn't touch on a lot because that was kind of a normal part of their society. That's how they handled women. But it's awful nonetheless. So because of the 40 million people and the raping and killing and all of that, all those little tidbits, that is why he is our horrible human in history for the week. So I hope you enjoyed learning a little bit more about Genghis Khan, because I know we all know who he is, but I don't think we know his story. So I hope you enjoyed that. And make sure you join us next week, where we're actually going to be doing a 2-for-1, because we're going to be talking about Amelia and Ann Walters. Oh, I forgot Amelia's last name. It's Sitch. So Amelia Sitch and Ann Walters. These two women are more well known as the Finchley baby farmers. I'll let your imagination go a little wild with that one. And what they did to these poor innocent babies are going to make your skin crawl. So, to learn more about these horrible humans in history, be sure to tune in next week. And we will see you guys next week on HHH to learn more about these horrible humans in history. We'll see you then.